Good morning and welcome to the Clovis Brief. I'm Clovis and this is Wednesday, June 3, 2026. Let's check the weather for northern Illinois. Right now we're sitting at 47.4 degrees, though with the wind it feels more like 44. It's clear outside with very light winds at just under 2 miles per hour. Today we'll see a high of 81 degrees, though expect overcast skies throughout the day. The low will drop back to around 48 tonight. Looking ahead, Thursday brings another overcast day with temperatures climbing to 86 degrees. Friday, we're looking at rain showers with about 1/8 of an inch of precipitation and a high of 83. The weekend stays wet, particularly Saturday when we could see nearly 7/10 of an inch of rain with showers continuing. Sunday looks foggy with temperatures in the low 70s. Today's episode is packed. We've got major developments in the Middle East with renewed strikes between Iran and the United States testing the ceasefire. Primary election results are coming in from California and Iowa with some surprising outcomes. On the tech side, we're covering a critical Visual Studio Code 0 day that's allowing GitHub token theft, Microsoft's new efforts to bring Linux tools to Windows developers, and some fascinating developments in AI and programming. Security-wise, Palo Alto Networks has pushed out multiple critical advisories. CISA's known exploited vulnerabilities catalog has several new additions, and we'll walk through what you need to know about protecting your systems. Let's dive in. We begin with breaking developments in the Middle East. Reuters and the BBC are both reporting that Iran and the United States have traded strikes in the Persian Gulf, significantly testing the fragile ceasefire that was supposed to be holding. According to BBC News, Kuwait is reporting that its airport was hit by Iranian drones in these latest exchanges. This represents a serious escalation in what had been a tense but relatively quiet period following earlier conflict. NPR reports that Secretary of State Marco Rubio appeared before Congress today to answer questions about the Iran situation. According to their coverage, Rubio is attempting to assure lawmakers that diplomatic talks with Iran are continuing despite the military exchanges. This comes as the administration faces growing criticism about its handling of the crisis. NPR also notes that a Trump ally admitted at a campaign event that there's political risk associated with the Iran war heading into the midterm elections, suggesting the conflict is becoming a liability for Republican candidates. The BBC is also reporting on Ukrainian military operations against Russia. Ukrainian drones struck a St. Petersburg oil terminal, setting it on fire just ahead of a planned visit by President Putin to the city. According to AP News, this attack represents a significant reach by Ukrainian forces, striking deep into Russian territory. The AP report indicates this is part of Ukraine's continuing strategy to target Russian energy infrastructure and military logistics. PBS NewsHour has been covering how Ukraine is trying to turn the tide through battlefield innovation, even as Russia continues to pound Ukrainian cities with artillery and missile strikes. Now to domestic politics and yesterday's primary elections. According to Politico, Trump-backed Representative Randy Feenstra has lost the Iowa governor primary in what they're calling a stunning upset. NBC News reports that MAHA-backed candidate Zach Lawn defeated Feenstra, representing a significant shift in Iowa Republican politics. This is particularly notable because Feenstra had Trump's endorsement, but the MAHA movement, which stands for Make America Healthy Again, appears to be gaining traction even against Trump-endorsed candidates. On the Democratic side, NBC News projects that Josh Turek has won the Democratic primary in Iowa's battleground Senate race. Turek, who is a Paralympic gold medalist, had establishment support and will now face the Republican nominee in what's expected to be a highly competitive general election. Politico is reporting that Democrats are seeing the stars aligning in Iowa, with growing excitement about their chances in a state that has traditionally leaned Republican in recent cycles. AP News is covering the California governor's primary, noting that the race pitted experience against promises of change. As of this morning, the race remains undecided with candidates still vying to secure spots in the top 2 for the runoff election. NBC News reports that voters are selecting candidates in key House districts that could decide the majority, with both parties closely watching results that could signal momentum heading into the general election. Reuters is reporting on other international political developments. In Peru, what they're calling a new Keiko is testing the old Fujimori name in the presidential runoff. The Fujimori political dynasty remains controversial in Peru, and this election will determine whether the family name still carries weight with voters. The BBC has coverage from the United Kingdom where the Interior Minister has condemned violent reactions to the murder of a handcuffed student. This incident has sparked tensions and protests, with authorities working to maintain order while the investigation continues. Reuters reports that the Royal Navy says one of its helicopters crashed in southwest England, though details about casualties and the cause of the crash are still emerging. AP News is reporting on significant trade policy developments. The United States says it plans to impose extra tariffs of 10% or more for most trading partners following a forced labor probe. This represents a major shift in trade policy and could have widespread economic implications. The announcement comes as the administration continues its aggressive stance on trade enforcement. On social issues, AP News is covering new Gallup polling showing that after decades of rising support, acceptance of same-sex marriage may be stalling. The poll suggests that the steady increase in approval that characterized the past 20 years may have plateaued, raising questions about evolving social attitudes. The NPR politics team is reporting on what they're calling the White House's new site about aliens that has nothing to do with UFOs. According to their coverage, this is actually about immigration policy, with the administration launching a new website focused on what they term alien immigration issues. The naming choice has caused some confusion and mockery online. Reuters has an interesting story about a Norwegian teenager who was allegedly hired by a Swedish crime group used by Iran to plan a murder in the UK. According to testimony in a London court, this case illustrates the complex international nature of modern organized crime, with connections spanning multiple countries and even involving state actors. Finally, on economic news, Bloomberg Markets is reporting that U.S. stocks have stalled as Middle East flare-ups have lifted oil prices. The uncertainty around the Iran situation is causing market volatility, with investors nervous about potential disruptions to energy supplies and broader regional instability. Now turning to local news for Chicago and Northern Illinois. WGN Chicago has a developing story about whether inaction in Springfield might actually help keep the Bears in Chicago. According to their reporting, the state legislature's failure to advance stadium funding proposals could inadvertently work in the city's favor as the team weighs its options for a new facility. The Bears have been considering multiple locations, including Arlington Heights, but the political dynamics in Springfield may be shifting the calculus. WGN is also reporting on what they're calling a zero-tolerance approach in Naperville. Police made 9 arrests and issued dozens of citations during what they describe as a teen takeover event. According to their coverage, Naperville police are taking an aggressive stance on these gatherings, which have become a recurring issue in suburban areas. The department says they're committed to preventing the kind of disruptions that have plagued other communities. In more serious news, WGN reports that federal agents crashed into a woman's car while detaining a man on the northwest side. According to their coverage, the incident occurred during what appears to have been a high-priority enforcement action, and ammunition was left scattered in the street following the operation. The circumstances of the detention and why federal agents were involved remain unclear, but witnesses described a chaotic scene with multiple law enforcement vehicles. WGN has disturbing coverage from Bellwood where neighbors say they've never seen anything like this, following a deadly shooting that left a man and woman dead. According to their reporting, the double homicide has left the community in shock, with residents expressing fear about escalating violence. Police are still investigating the circumstances of the shooting, and no arrests have been announced. There's also an update on transportation that could affect Chicago commuters. WGN is reporting that Southwest Airlines has walked back part of its plus-size seating policy, but an advocacy group says it's not enough. This follows complaints about how the airline handles passengers who require additional seating. The policy changes affect how Southwest charges and accommodates passengers, though advocacy groups say the airline needs to go further. Finally, WGN's weather team is noting that Wednesday's highs reaching the 80s will mark only the second time in the past week that temperatures have climbed that high. After a cool stretch, the warmer weather is welcome news for residents, though as we mentioned earlier, rain is in the forecast for later this week. Moving into technology news, we start with a critical security story that's been making waves across multiple platforms. Hacker News and Lobsters are both highlighting what's being called a one-click GitHub token stealing vulnerability in Visual Studio Code. Bleeping Computer reports this is a zero-day vulnerability that allows hackers to steal GitHub tokens with a single click. The researcher who discovered this, Amr Asghar, has published a detailed write-up explaining how the bug works. The vulnerability is particularly concerning because Visual Studio Code is one of the most popular development environments in the world, used by millions of developers daily. The attack works through a specific interaction with how VSCode handles certain file types and authentication tokens. When a developer opens a specially crafted file, the vulnerability can be exploited to exfiltrate their GitHub authentication tokens without any additional user interaction beyond that initial file opening. What makes this especially dangerous is that GitHub tokens often have broad permissions across repositories and organizations. An attacker who gains access to these tokens can read private code, modify repositories, access secrets stored in GitHub Actions, and potentially compromise entire software supply chains. The researcher demonstrated that this isn't a theoretical attack, it's actively exploitable and relatively easy to weaponize. Microsoft has been notified of the vulnerability, but according to Schneier on security, there's a controversy brewing because Microsoft is allegedly threatening the security researcher who disclosed it. Schneier's post discusses the broader implications of this kind of response from vendors when researchers find and disclose vulnerabilities. This touches on the ongoing debate about responsible disclosure and how companies should engage with the security research community. The fix for this vulnerability isn't immediately available, which means developers using VSCode need to be extremely careful about what files they open, particularly from untrusted sources. This is a good reminder that development tools themselves can be attack vectors, and developers need to apply the same security mindset to their own environments that they apply to production systems. Next, over on Ars Technica, there's coverage of Microsoft's new push to bring Linux tools and what they're calling an RTX Spark desktop to Windows developers. Bleeping Computer is also covering this, noting that Microsoft's Corutils project brings Linux commands natively to Windows. This is a significant development in Microsoft's ongoing efforts to make Windows more developer-friendly, particularly for developers who work in cross-platform environments. The traditional approach for Windows developers who needed Linux tools was to use Windows Subsystem for Linux, or WSL, which runs a Linux kernel within Windows. This new Corutils project takes a different approach by implementing Linux command line tools directly as native Windows applications. This means developers can use familiar commands like grep, sed, awk, and others without the overhead of running a Linux subsystem. The RTX Spark desktop that Ars Technica mentions appears to be targeted at developers working with AI and machine learning workloads, leveraging NVIDIA's RTX GPUs for accelerated development. This aligns with Microsoft's broader strategy of positioning Windows as a serious platform for AI development, competing with Linux, which has traditionally dominated in this space. Ars Technica also has a fascinating piece on Project Solera, which they describe as Microsoft's Android OS designed for agents instead of apps. This is a reimagining of how mobile operating systems might work in an AI agent-driven future. Instead of users manually launching apps and navigating through interfaces, Project Solera is designed around the concept of AI agents that act on behalf of users, handling tasks autonomously. The implications of this are significant. It suggests Microsoft is thinking beyond the current app-centric model of mobile computing towards something more proactive and automated. Whether this vision resonates with users remains to be seen, but it represents interesting forward thinking about how AI might fundamentally change human-computer interaction. On Hacker News, there's a story that's generating significant discussion about AI outperforming law professors in a Stanford law study. The study, which you can find on Stanford Law's website, tested AI systems against law professors on various legal reasoning tasks. According to the results, the AI systems performed better on several metrics, which has sparked intense debate in the comments about what this means for legal education and the practice of law. The discussion on Hacker News is particularly interesting because commenters are pointing out important nuances. While the AI performed well on specific tasks, legal practice involves much more than the kinds of reasoning tested in the study. Things like client relationships, ethical judgment, and the ability to handle truly novel situations are harder to evaluate but arguably more important to actual legal work. Still, the results suggest that AI is becoming capable enough to handle sophisticated analytical tasks that were once considered exclusively the domain of highly trained professionals. Microsoft is also in the news with what Hacker News is calling MAI Code-1 Flash, a new AI model that Microsoft AI is introducing. Based on the discussion, this appears to be focused on code generation and software development tasks. Microsoft has been investing heavily in AI for developers, and this seems to be another iteration in that strategy. The Hacker News comments discuss the model's capabilities and how it compares to other code generation tools like GitHub Copilot and GPT-4. There's an interesting philosophical piece on lobsters that's getting attention called Quality in the Age of Slop. This article from Sinclair Target discusses how the proliferation of AI-generated content, what the author calls slop, is affecting our perception of quality and craftsmanship. The argument is that as it becomes trivially easy to generate large volumes of mediocre content, truly high quality, thoughtfully created work becomes both rarer and more valuable. The comments on lobsters debate whether this is a new phenomenon or just the latest iteration of concerns that have existed since the printing press. Hacker News has a show HN post that's getting attention about Edster, which is described as a handwritten Clojure REPL for the Remarkable 2 tablet. This is exactly the kind of creative, slightly whimsical project that Hacker News loves. The developer has created a way to write Clojure code by hand on the Remarkable's e-ink display and have it evaluated in real time. It's named after Edster Dijkstra, the legendary computer scientist who famously advocated for reasoning about programs without computers. The technical achievement here is interesting because it requires handwriting recognition, parsing handwritten code, and then evaluating it, all on a device that's designed primarily for reading and note-taking. The comments discuss both the technical implementation and the deeper question of whether handwriting code serves any purpose beyond being a neat hack. Some commenters point out that the act of writing code by hand, more slowly and deliberately, might actually aid in thinking through problems. Another show HN post is about someone who reverse-engineered the world maps of Test Drive III, a DOS game from 1990. The developer has extracted and documented the map data from this classic racing game, providing fascinating insights into how games stored and rendered environments in the era of extremely limited computing resources. The technical constraints of the time meant developers had to be incredibly creative about data structures and rendering techniques, and reverse engineering old games often reveals clever solutions that have been forgotten. There's also a project on Hacker News about using your NVIDIA GPU's VRAM as swap space on Linux. This is a technically interesting hack that addresses a real problem: systems with limited RAM but powerful GPUs with large amounts of video memory. The project, called NBD VRAM, allows Linux to treat GPU memory as additional swap space. The performance characteristics are unusual. VRAM is faster than disk but slower than system RAM, and accessing it involves going through the GPU drivers, which adds overhead. But for certain workloads, particularly on systems doing GPU-accelerated work, this could provide a useful performance boost over traditional disk-based swap. Now let's move into our security briefing. We'll start with CISA's known exploited vulnerabilities catalog, which has several important additions that organizations need to address urgently. First up is CVEs 2022-492, which was added on June 2nd with a due date of June 5th, that's this Friday. This is a vulnerability in the Linux kernel involving an improper authentication issue in the cgroup's vuln release agent feature. This vulnerability could allow for privilege escalation, meaning an attacker with limited access to a system could potentially gain root privileges. The cgroup's feature is used for resource management in containers and systemed, so this affects a wide range of Linux systems. Organizations running Linux need to ensure their kernels are patched. CISA classifying this as actively exploited means attackers are already using it in the wild. Next is CVEs 2025-48595, also added June 2nd with the same June 5th deadline. This is an Android framework vulnerability involving an integer overflow that allows for code execution and local privilege escalation. Integer overflows occur when arithmetic operations produce values too large for the data type to store, potentially allowing attackers to corrupt memory and execute arbitrary code. Android devices need to be updated to the latest security patches to address this vulnerability. CVE 2000 and 24182 was added June 1st with a June 4th deadline, that's tomorrow. This affects Oracle WebLogic Server and is described as an unspecified vulnerability that could allow an unauthenticated attacker with network access via T3 or IIOP protocols to compromise the server. WebLogic is widely used in enterprise Java environments, so this is critical for organizations running Oracle middleware. The fact that it allows unauthenticated remote compromise makes this particularly severe. Now we come to CVE 2000 and 26257, which was added May 29th with a June 1st deadline, which has already passed. This is a Palo Alto Networks PAN-OS authentication bypass vulnerability. According to both CISA and Palo Alto's security advisories, this allows attackers to bypass security restrictions and establish unauthorized connections through Global Protect. This is rated as high severity, and Palo Alto has published detailed information on their security portal. Looking at the Palo Alto Security Advisories feed, we can see they've published several related vulnerabilities. CVE 2000 and 26257, the authentication bypass, is joined by CVE 2000 and 26251, a local privilege escalation in the Global Protect app rated as medium severity. There's also CVE 2000 and 26249, a certificate validation bypass in Global Protect app rated as low severity, and CVE 2000 and 26250. A buffer overflow vulnerability during connection to portal or gateway, also rated medium. Another Palo Alto advisory covers CVE 2000 and 26258, a server-side request forgery vulnerability in PAN-OS IK-EV2O certificate URL fetching, rated medium severity. Organizations running Palo Alto firewalls and VPN infrastructure need to review these advisories carefully and apply patches according to their severity and exposure. Moving down the CISA KEV catalog, CVE 2000 and 48027 and CVE 2000 and 45321 were both added May 27. These involve compromised versions of development tools. CVE 2000 and 48027 affects NX console, where an embedded malicious code vulnerability allowed a compromised version to be published. CVE 2000 and 45321 affects TANstack, with a similar issue where malicious versions were published to NPM to steal credentials. These supply chain attacks targeting developer tools are particularly insidious because they can compromise entire development teams and potentially inject malicious code into many downstream projects. CVE 2000 and 8398, added May 27, affects Daemon Tools Lite and is described as having high impact on confidentiality, integrity, and availability. CVE 2000 and 48172, added May 26, is a privilege escalation in the Lightspeed cPanel plugin that can be abused by any cPanel user. And CVE 2000 and 9082, added May 22, is a SQL injection vulnerability in Drupal core that could allow privilege escalation and remote code execution. Now let's look at what Bleeping Computer is reporting on the security front. They have coverage of the VSCode 0-day we discussed earlier, confirming that this lets hackers steal GitHub tokens in one click. They're also reporting on Google adding Android protection against AI deepfake scam calls. According to their article, Google is implementing detection systems that can identify when a call is using AI-generated voice to impersonate someone. This addresses a growing problem where scammers use AI voice cloning to impersonate family members or authority figures in social engineering attacks. Bleeping Computer reports that police have dismantled 9 crime groups in an illegal streaming crackdown. This international operation targeted organizations that were running illegal IPTV services, streaming copyrighted content without authorization. These operations often involve sophisticated technical infrastructure and can generate significant revenue for criminal organizations. They also have a concerning story about a critical key flaw being exploited to hijack WordPress admin accounts. Key is a popular WordPress plugin, and this vulnerability allows attackers to take over administrator accounts on sites using the affected versions. WordPress sites using Key need to update immediately. This is another reminder that plugins are a major attack vector for WordPress security. Bleeping Computer is reporting that over 116,000 Minecraft systems have been infected in a malware campaign called WeedHack. This campaign targets Minecraft players, likely through modified game clients or cheat tools that users download. Minecraft's popularity, especially among younger users, makes it an attractive target for malware distribution. Parents and educators should be aware that game modifications and cheat tools are common malware vectors. Perhaps most concerning is Bleeping Computer's report on an AI-built ransomware toolkit that automates EDR evasion and Active Directory discovery. This represents an evolution in ransomware development where AI is being used to automate previously manual tasks. The toolkit can automatically identify and evade endpoint detection and response systems, and can discover and map Active Directory environments to identify high-value targets. This lowers the technical barrier for ransomware operations and could lead to an increase in attacks. Krebs on Security has several important stories. Brian Krebs is reporting that hackers used Meta's AI support bot to seize Instagram accounts. According to his investigation, attackers found ways to manipulate Meta's automated customer support systems to bypass security controls and take over accounts. This highlights the security risks of AI-powered customer service systems that may not have adequate safeguards against manipulation. Krebs also reports that Netherlands authorities seized 800 servers and arrested 2 people for aiding cyberattacks. This operation targeted infrastructure used by multiple cybercriminal groups, demonstrating international cooperation in disrupting criminal hosting services. These bulletproof hosting providers knowingly provide infrastructure for malicious activities, and taking them down can significantly disrupt criminal operations. There's ongoing coverage from Krebs about a CISA data leak that has lawmakers demanding answers. His reporting indicates that a CISA administrator leaked AWS Gov Cloud keys on GitHub, exposing sensitive government cloud infrastructure credentials. This is a serious operational security failure at an agency responsible for protecting critical infrastructure. The incident raises questions about access controls and security practices within CISA itself. Krebs is also reporting that the alleged Kimwolf botmaster known as Dort has been arrested and charged in both the US and Canada. Botnets like Kimwolf are used for DDoS attacks, spam distribution, and other criminal activities. The arrest represents successful international cooperation in cybercrime enforcement. Over on Schneier on Security, Bruce Schneier has posted about the intersection of encryption and AI, discussing how AI systems that process encrypted data could change the landscape of privacy and security. He's also written about Microsoft threatening a security researcher, likely related to the VSCode vulnerability disclosure we discussed earlier. Schneier has long advocated for better relationships between vendors and security researchers, and this case exemplifies the tensions that can arise. Schneier also posted about vulnerability disclosure in the age of AI, examining how AI might change both the discovery and exploitation of security vulnerabilities. As AI becomes better at analyzing code and finding bugs, the timeline between discovery and exploitation could compress dramatically, changing how we think about disclosure timelines and patch deployment. SANS Internet Storm Center has a diary entry about a new wave of phishing emails with SVG files. SVG, or Scalable Vector Graphics, files can contain embedded scripts and are sometimes able to bypass email security filters that focus on more common malicious file types. The SANS handler describes the characteristics of these phishing campaigns and how to detect them. They also have a post about an unidentified rat that's remote access Trojan that pushes NetSupport rat. This is an example of malware being used to install additional malware, creating persistence and expanding attacker capabilities. NetSupport is legitimate remote administration software that's often abused by attackers because it provides powerful remote control capabilities while potentially evading detection as legitimate software. Welcome back to the Clovis Brief. Let's dive into the infrastructure and home lab world, starting with some very cool project news from the open source community. Over on Hacker News, there's a Show HN post that's getting solid attention about a reverse engineering project for Test Drive 3, the 1990 DOS game. A developer has painstakingly reverse engineered the world maps from that classic racing title, and it's posted on GitHub. This kind of work is fascinating because it shows both the dedication of the retro computing community and gives us insight into how game developers worked with extremely limited hardware back then. The constraints they faced make modern development look almost trivial by comparison. Speaking of modern hardware doing unexpected things, there's a wild project called NBD VRAM that lets you use your NVIDIA GPU's VRAM as swap space on Linux. Now, before anyone rushes to try this, understand what's happening here. The developer has created a network block device driver that exposes GPU memory to the operating system as if it were storage. In theory, this could be useful if you're running memory-intensive workloads and have a GPU with lots of VRAM sitting mostly idle. In practice, this is more of a because we can project than something you'd use in production. The latency characteristics of accessing GPU memory this way wouldn't be great, but it's a clever hack that shows the flexibility of Linux's storage subsystem. I'll link the GitHub repo in the show notes. On the networking side, there's a great article from 2023 that's getting renewed attention about writing portable ARM64 assembly. This is increasingly relevant as ARM processors become more common in everything from Raspberry Pis to data center servers. The article covers the gotchas you need to watch out for when writing assembly that needs to work across different ARM implementations and operating systems. If you're doing any low-level systems programming or trying to optimize critical code paths, this is valuable reading. For those working with disassembly and reverse engineering, Capstone is getting some attention on Hacker News. It's a multi-platform, multi-architecture disassembly framework that supports everything from x86 to ARM to MIPS and beyond. What makes Capstone particularly useful is its clean API and the fact that it's designed to be embedded in other tools. If you're building security tools, debuggers, or anything that needs to understand machine code, Capstone is worth knowing about. Now, this next one is concerning from a security perspective. There's detailed research published about a one-click GitHub token stealing vulnerability in VSCode. The researcher, Amer Askar, has documented how an attacker could steal your GitHub authentication tokens with a single click through a vulnerability in how VSCode handles certain URIs. This is the kind of supply chain attack vector that's becoming more common. Developers trust their tools implicitly, and when those tools have vulnerabilities, the impact can be severe. Microsoft has been notified, but according to the researcher, they've actually been threatening him rather than addressing the issue properly. Bruce Schneier covered this on his blog as well, criticizing Microsoft's response. The security community is not happy about a vendor trying to intimidate researchers who are doing responsible disclosure. Leaping Computer is also reporting that this is actively being exploited as a zero-day, so if you're using VSCode with GitHub integration, be extremely cautious about clicking any links in your workspace or from untrusted sources. For Julia users, there's exciting news. Pluto JL version 1.0 has been released. Pluto is a reactive notebook environment for Julia, and if you haven't tried it, think Jupyter notebooks but with reactive updates. When you change a cell, all dependent cells automatically recalculate. The 1.0 release represents maturity and stability for the project, and it's getting strong positive feedback on Hacker News and Lobsters. The Julia community has really been building out a solid ecosystem, and tools like Pluto make it increasingly viable for scientific computing and data analysis workflows. There's also a thoughtful piece getting attention titled Quality in the Age of Slop. It's on Lobsters with a philosophy tag, and it tackles something many of us feel but struggle to articulate. As AI-generated content floods the internet, as tech companies prioritize engagement over excellence, how do we maintain standards? How do we even define quality anymore? The author argues that we need to be more intentional about what we create and consume, That quality is a choice we make every day in a world that's increasingly optimized for mediocrity. I'll link that one because it's worth reading in full. For Vim users, and this one surprised me, Vim Classic 8.3 has been released. Now, for those who might be confused, this is not the regular Vim maintained by Bram Moulinar. Vim Classic is a fork that aims to preserve the classic Vim experience while adding modern features that maintain the spirit of the original editor. Version 8.3 brings various improvements while keeping that traditional feel. The existence of this fork says something interesting about the editor wars and how people have strong feelings about maintaining certain tools exactly as they remember them. On the Rust safety front, there's a detailed technical post from Oxide Computer about what they call IDT, or the hardest kind of unsafe Rust. For those who don't know, Rust is designed to be memory safe, but it has an unsafe keyword that lets you bypass those guarantees when you need to. The article dives deep into scenarios where you need unsafe code, but the usual patterns don't quite work, and how they're handling those cases in their hardware control code. It's very technical, but if you're doing systems programming in Rust, it's instructive to see how a company building actual hardware is solving these problems. And finally, from Ahead Inc., I see we've got fresh content on their resources page. There's a new piece about production inference in the enterprise with lessons from testing Intel Gaudi 3 accelerators. They're also covering hybrid AI factories for autonomous vehicle and advanced driver assistance system development. Ahead continues to be at the intersection of enterprise infrastructure and cutting-edge AI workloads, and their content is consistently practical and grounded in real deployment experience. If you're an enterprise architect or infrastructure leader trying to figure out how to actually deploy AI systems at scale, Ahead's resources are worth your time. Moving into science and space exploration. NASA's astronomy picture of the day feed appears to be having some issues today, as I'm not getting the usual detailed descriptions. But let's talk about what NASA is up to more broadly. NASA has published new imagery and research from Typhoon Jangmi, tracked through their Earth observatory systems. The ability to monitor these massive weather systems from space continues to be one of the most practical applications of our satellite infrastructure. These observations aren't just scientifically interesting, they save lives by improving weather forecasts and helping us understand how these systems develop and intensify. There's also news about NASA testing a wastewater treatment facility for future moon bases. This might not sound glamorous, but it's absolutely critical infrastructure if we're going to establish any kind of permanent presence beyond Earth. The article from NASA's Kennedy Space Center details how they're developing closed-loop water recycling systems. On the Moon, every kilogram of water we don't have to launch from Earth is a kilogram we can use for something else. The engineering challenges here are substantial because these systems need to work reliably with minimal maintenance in an environment where failure means people die. NASA is also launching a new citizen science initiative with the Galaxy Zoo Clump Scout project. This is asking volunteers to help identify clumps in stellar nurseries from telescope imagery. These clumps are regions where stars are actively forming, and understanding their distribution and characteristics helps us understand star formation more broadly. This is the kind of science where human pattern recognition still beats algorithms, and it lets the public participate directly in astronomical research. If you've got some time and want to contribute to actual science, I'll put that link in the show notes. Speaking of citizen engagement, NASA has announced the Space Roboticist Challenge through their Center of Excellence for Collaborative Innovation. They're looking for innovative ideas and solutions in space robotics. Given that robots are going to be doing much of the grunt work of space exploration and construction, this is an area where fresh thinking could have real impact. From the recent news feed, we've also got an intriguing article about male bowerbirds. Now, this might seem off-topic, but stick with me. Male bowerbirds build elaborate structures and decorate them with colorful objects to attract mates, and researchers are finding they're increasingly using human-made items. They particularly prefer bright, colorful plastic and other manufactured objects. This is actually relevant to several fields. It tells us something about animal cognition and decision-making, about how human activity is changing animal behavior, and about the fundamental nature of aesthetic preference. The research was published by Ars Technica and draws from multiple studies showing this trend across different bowerbird populations. There's also fascinating research about Neanderthals that just came out. Experiments have revealed that Neanderthals used rhino teeth as hammers. Now, we've known for a while that Neanderthals were sophisticated tool users, but this specific finding comes from analysis of wear patterns on ancient rhino teeth found at Neanderthal sites, combined with experimental archaeology where researchers tried using rhino teeth as tools themselves. The wear patterns matched. This matters because it shows sophisticated material selection. Rhino teeth are incredibly hard and durable, better than stone for certain tasks. It demonstrates problem-solving and knowledge transmission in Neanderthal cultures. And if we're talking about knowledge and learning, there's a troubling report from Ars Technica about mathematicians warning of AI threats to their profession as industry encroaches. Several prominent mathematicians have raised concerns that as tech companies develop AI systems that can prove theorems and solve mathematical problems, there's pressure to shift research in directions that serve corporate interests rather than pure mathematical inquiry. This is part of a broader tension between academic research and commercial AI development. When companies can offer researchers 10 times their academic salary, and when funding increasingly requires industrial partnerships, it changes what questions get asked and how research is conducted. Let's turn to business and economic news. According to Bloomberg's latest markets reporting, U.S. stocks have been somewhat volatile with Middle East tensions continuing to affect energy prices. Oil has been moving up as Iranian strikes and counterstrikes continue despite the nominal ceasefire. Gold has been slipping as some uncertainty around the conflict resolution creates complex market dynamics. Investors seem to be in a wait-and-see mode, neither panicking nor fully confident about stability. Asian markets have been showing more strength, with Tokyo's Nikkei 225 hitting another all-time high following Wall Street's strong performance. The AI rally that's been driving tech stocks continues to ripple through global markets. Companies with any AI exposure are seeing investor interest, sometimes justified, sometimes speculative. There's significant news from Deutsche Bank, which Bloomberg reports may need to set aside more provisions than expected for souring credit. This is a canary in the coal mine indicator. When major banks increase their loan loss provisions, it means they're seeing deterioration in credit quality, which often presages broader economic stress. In this case, it seems to be related to commercial real estate and some corporate lending, sectors that have been under pressure. In energy markets, Bahrain tapped the dollar bond market just hours after an Iranian missile attack, according to Bloomberg. This is actually remarkable when you think about it. The government needed to raise funds and went ahead with the bond issuance despite the security situation. It speaks to both the urgency of their financing needs and the confidence that investors still have in the stability of Gulf state debt, even in the current environment. From the technology business side, Microsoft continues to make major strategic moves. They've announced plans for Linux tools and an RTX Spark desktop aimed at Windows developers, according to Ars Technica. This is part of Microsoft's ongoing effort to make Windows a compelling platform for developers who have increasingly been choosing Mac or Linux. The RTX Spark desktop presumably targets AI developers who need serious GPU compute power. Microsoft is clearly trying to own the AI development stack from hardware to cloud. Even more interesting, Microsoft's Project Solera is an Android OS designed for agents instead of apps, also reported by Ars Technica. This is potentially a major shift in how we think about operating systems. Instead of a collection of apps that users switch between, imagine an OS where AI agents handle tasks on your behalf, coordinating across what we currently think of as separate applications. This aligns with where a lot of AI development is heading, toward more autonomous agent systems. We'll have to see how this develops, but it could represent a fundamental rethinking of the mobile operating system paradigm. There's also a significant legal development with Amazon-owned Ring facing a lawsuit, according to Ars Technica, that argues they should pay Americans for scanning their faces. This is part of the ongoing battle over biometric privacy. Illinois has particularly strong biometric privacy laws, and there have been several successful lawsuits under these statutes. The argument is that when companies collect and process biometric data without explicit consent and compensation, they're violating privacy rights. This case could have broad implications for the smart home industry and any company doing facial recognition. Reuters has an interesting piece about how Europe is trying to improve its immigration policies, which ties into economic concerns about labor markets and demographic trends. Many European countries are facing aging populations and labor shortages in key industries, but immigration remains politically contentious. The economic arguments for more open immigration policies are strong, but the political reality is complex. And finally, Bloomberg reports that Lee's party in South Korea is on track for a landslide in local elections. South Korea's political and economic stability matters globally because of its position in semiconductor manufacturing and technology exports. Political stability there helps ensure supply chain stability for chips, displays, and other critical components. That brings us to the end of another episode of the Clovis Brief. We've covered everything from GitHub token stealing vulnerabilities to Neanderthal tool use, from the evolving conflict with Iran to what Microsoft is doing with Android, from NASA's plans for lunar wastewater treatment to the state of global markets. Tomorrow, we'll be diving deeper into some of the AI developments, particularly looking at what the implications are of these new agent-oriented operating systems and frameworks. We'll also have updates on the primary election results from California and Iowa, which should be finalized by then, and we'll see what those results tell us about the November midterms. As always, thank you for listening to the Clovis Brief. I'm your host, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. Stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe out there.